Well,
Well,
first I want to go ahead, Tara.
okay. Well, hello, everyone. I just wanted to welcome everybody to Introducing the Diversity Lab, Strengthening the Educator Workforce session today. My name is Tara Donahue, and I work with Region 8 in Ohio. It's glad to see everybody here, and welcome to all of those who are watching the recording. Today's session is going to go over give you an overview of a 3-session diversity labs, where the first one talks about context and really setting the purpose and finding out why this work is so important, followed by a second session of the district context and root cause analysis, and a third session that really starts getting into strategic action planning and figuring out what those next steps are. So I will turn it over to my fantastic colleagues, Shantice Wheeler and Tammy Knights, to go into more detail and kick everything off.
Thank you. If you don't mind advancing. Well, I just want to say good morning. I know I accidentally talked over Tara. She's doing that wonderful introduction. My name is Shantice Wheeler. I am a senior TA, which is a technical assistance consultant with American Institutes for Research. I'm excited to be here with you all. I'm coming from the wonderful state of Georgia, the city of Atlanta, and we're going to have a wonderful collaboration and discussion today. And I'm going to go ahead and let my wonderful teammate introduce herself as well.
Yep, I'm Tammy Knights, also from American Institutes for Research, and this work and these labs have been really, it's the right word, just empowering, I think, that we've done in a few states over the past few years, and just excited to bring that information and sort of an overview of what these labs can do for you. To other folks that are interested in racially diversifying their workforce.
So we have just a small family here today in this webinar. We would like you all to, if you can't show your camera, great. If you can't, that's wonderful too, but please come off mute. If you don't mind introducing yourselves, telling us where you are coming from, the location, your organization, and tell us how your district or school approaches diversity training, or if it doesn't, what do you hope to learn from this session?
Well, I'll start. I'm Lorraine Thorson, and I'm from the state of Michigan. I've worked with the Region 8 program here in Michigan around the FPME launch program, which was our Future Proud Michigan Educator launch. And a lot of what the work that we've been trying to do is diversify the workforce and try and figure out how do we entice young people to enter the field of education and stay in their community, to work with the students that they come from, the area that they come from. That's been a major goal for us, diversity-wise, and diversity as we moved into my office, moved into the office of MyLeap, which is the Michigan Lifelong Education at Advancement and Potential Office, which was created by the governor to kind of bring together out of school time, preschool, universities, and other partners within education pathways to help all citizens in Michigan to advance in their lifelong potential. So that's where I come from. And as far as diversity training in the schools, I'm not directly involved in that, but we are doing a lot with the CTE students around that.
Thank you so much. Anyone else like to introduce themselves? Carrie, I see you.
Hi, yeah, my name's Carrie Murphy. I am not actually in Region 8. I live in Laramie, Wyoming. I'm with the National Comprehensive Center. And in another role outside of work, I serve on my local school board in Laramie, Wyoming. And this really caught my eye. We are a state that our state legislature recently shut down the Office of DEI at the University of Wyoming, for example, and that is very much like the culture from the top level, from the state level, and it's very unfortunate. And so like the how we approach diversity training, I think is probably the answer is probably that we don't, right? Like that's probably the honest answer right now. And at the same time, when we do culture and climate surveys in our schools, we know that that's a problem, right? Like there are people in our schools who don't feel like they belong, students and teachers. And so it's clearly important, it's clearly a need, and there's like that, you know, that tension of it is not supported from the top level. So anyway, that's kind of the perspective that I'm coming from today.
Thank you for sharing. Beth, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. This is Beth Howard Brown, and I am in South Carolina. And just so that you know, was that Kara? No, Carrie. Carrie. I have been to Laramie, worked with the Wyoming Department of Education in the space of supporting social and mental emotional well-being and help develop the Thrive framework. But in terms of this space, I work with the states of Colorado and Illinois in assisting them in diversifying the educator workforce. So just excited about hearing more about the great work that's taking place in Ohio. So thank you for letting me share.
Yeah. So now what we're going to do is really look at the session agenda in depth. Like I said, we're like Tara said, we're going to have an overview of the diversity labs, and that we're going to look at the importance of having racially diverse teacher workforce, the history of Black teachers, and other unintended consequences around that, the barriers of Black, Latin and Indigenous teachers in the educator pipeline, opportunities to disrupt barriers. We'll provide some tools and resources to support local and state efforts, and we'll really have a good discussion on what can you do next. So our objective for this session is to understand the importance of racially diverse teachers. And the next one is understanding some challenges that new racially diverse teachers face, explore culturally responsive mentoring in practice, learn about strategies and resources for culturally responsive mentoring. Tara mentioned that when you conduct the diversity labs, it's a 3-meeting journey. That first meeting is setting the purpose, landscape analysis, looking at the barriers, disrupting the barriers, and really then we dig into the district context. Based on the information and the purpose behind the diversity lab, we really want the districts to create a problem statement. There are problem statements and looking at root cause analysis as far as why these things are occurring. And from there, in that third meeting, they're going to come up with strategies and action planning because we need to get to the action. Where do we go from here? What do we need to do in order to make create a sense of change? When you know better, you do better, right?
You can go to the next one, Tara. And so like Shantice was saying, that in our work with districts or states, we bring together teams of people, whether it's district teams, that it can include principals, HR folks, curriculum folks. If they have a partnership with a university for teacher prep, we try to get as many people in the room as possible to have these conversations, because we all know that this work isn't going to be solved by one office or one person. And we go through that series that Shantice was just talking about, usually 2 whole day sessions together with that one in the middle that we get to know each district or state, each team a little bit better. But we want to chat a little bit for a second. And I think again, we had a nice poll set up and everything, but I think because we're a small group, we can talk about this. And I just want you to think about, when was the first time you had, and sorry, let me go back for a second. Many of the activities that we're going to do today are things that we would do in the labs, and we would encourage people to do in labs, in conversations, because we have recognized that when we are having conversations around race, around diversity, we need to create an environment where we can feel vulnerable, that we can talk about our lived experiences, so that we can actually get to real root causes later on. And it doesn't feel like an attack on any person. We are where we are. And we just want to make sure that we're action forward, but action forward on the real reasons and not just trying to sort of put a Band-Aid on an issue. So we always start our sessions with an activity like this. So let's just round the room, right? Who's in the room? Let's talk about what your experiences have been. So we'd love for you to participate in that by thinking about when you had a first Black or Latine or Indigenous teacher or leader, and what was your recollection of that? And, we started talking this about already about knowing what you know now. Was that experience important for you? And if so, how? And then also if there were other identities of teachers that you had that were meaningful to you because they shared your identity or impacted you in some way. So we would love to just have people share.
Seventh grade for me.
Okay.
And what I think surprises me looking back is that also might have been like the only one in my whole K through 12, because I was thinking even beyond seventh grade, I can't think of any others. And that's kind of astounding, right? Like, I don't know that I was fully aware or thought about it at the time, but looking back, I'm like, is that right? Were there no others? But one Black seventh grade math teacher.
And what do you remember about that teacher?
Gosh, seventh grade was a long time ago. I can't think of any particular distinction that stands out in my mind, really.
Okay. Gotcha. Lorraine, how about you?
Well, same here. It was college for me because I grew up in a very homogeneous community that was 100% white families and mostly, Catholic area. So we didn't have a lot of diversity at all. I remember even in junior high, we had one Black family move into the school district, and that was it. So I didn't have much experience. So I chose to go to a diverse college because I didn't have anything like that when I was growing up. So I went to Wayne State University, which is in Detroit, and that's where I encountered other students of other cultures, and I learned an awful lot about culture and that from them and from the teachers that were part of that. And still, even at Wayne State back in the day when I was going there, there wasn't a lot of variety of teachers in the education field.
Yeah.
Even. And my fellow students, was probably a 1-to-10 ratio of white to Black, even at Wayne State, which was, in the heart of Detroit, which was at that time almost all African American community.
Right.
So I had very, very little experience growing up. I'm probably quite a bit older than Carrie, so I don't remember a lot of that. And I remember being encouraged to go into education and then coming out of college when there were no jobs. So that was a time when they were really pushing hard for more teachers, and I'm afraid that's going to happen to our kids now, that we're pushing very hard to get more teachers, and then the job market will be overly full by the time they get out of college. And I don't want to discourage kids from entering the field, but I think we're going to end up in the same kind of situation we were back in the 70s. As far as meaningful experiences, I think that really defined my life around wanting to live in a diverse community. When I got married, moved into a diverse community, that kind of thing. And I think that really changed the way I looked at the world when I first started having the experiences.
And Beth, do you want to share?
Thank you, Tammy. My first teacher of color, and I just realized I'm not sure, she might have been indigenous, was a nun, because I attended Catholic school and went through preschool, kindergarten with white teachers, and had my first teacher of color as a first grader. And what I remember about her, first of all, she was a nun, so she was extremely strict, but she was the person that motivated me to really read and dig in, because she said on my report card, and I still remember to this day, that Beth is a go-getter. Even though as a child I had a problem with brown and down, and that's when my parents realized that you probably need glasses, but I was in denial even as a first grade child, and did not receive glasses until second grade. That was then I had another African American teacher who was extremely strict, Eloise Williams. And knowing what I know now, it was important to me because it really changed my life for someone to put that in writing on a report card, and for me to remember that even now as a former teacher, but I still teach graduate courses here at the local university, and just the difference that one sentence could make in a child's life and could change how they show up in the classroom moving forward. Are there any other identities of teachers you had that were meaningful to you? The other one was Miss Eloise Williams. She, again, put the love of reading in me, even though at times it might have been not the most official or approved way. I attended Catholic school. Let me just leave it like that. They were very strict, and they were still paddling during those times, even though some of the methods were not approved. But I just remember just the folks just believing in you and stating and saying to others in front of you that you're smart, that you're brilliant, and you are going to do great things. So I just appreciate that from those teachers that I had early in my education career. Thank you for letting me share.
Thank you.
Can I
Let's go to
share
the next
something?
one. Please, Shantice.
Real quick. And I always like to say this, because it's a unique situation I am in, being from Atlanta and growing up in Atlanta. And I think I had diverse teachers from when I moved from Michigan back to Atlanta, from first grade on up to I graduated from high school. Where the lack of diversity happened was when I went to undergrad. So that's when it was like even though it was a diverse population of students, the lack of diversity there as far as the professors or anything like that, even in my field of education, it was different for me. And I think you have that motivation and that support all the way through, just seeing, Black and Hispanic or white, whoever teachers caring and looking like the kids. I think I saw that, but in college, it was a shock, not as far as culture shock as with the other students, but relating and having those conversations with their professors was different, right? And I had to learn how to navigate there. So I think that's on my end, as an African-American female going through my career pathway, that was different for me.
Thank you. So, these are some slides that we know this is what's out there, but we want to share them because, well, I will say this. I think the folks on this call know. I think sometimes we work with districts where their community does not actually know this information, or their board may not actually believe this information, right? So part of the work too is providing resources and tools for different districts and states to be able to make the case for why things are important. So as we look at this, and we'll get into a little bit of history too of how does racial diversity compare with student diversity, and this is where it really gets in there of that parity between teachers and who kids are seeing, right? And why this is so important. Go to the next slide, Tara, please. Thank you. And we know from from research as well. I think we know some common sense things, but we also know from research that having racially diverse teachers benefits all students. There's a sense of teachers' expectations of students' abilities and success, more inclusive, relevant content, valuable role model or authority figure, and just creating that opportunity for developing empathy and tolerance for people of other backgrounds. We also know specifically that there is research that says, particularly for students of color taught by teachers of color, or Black students having Black teachers, improves attendance and behavioral outcomes. There's actually an improved reading and mathematics achievement. And there's studies that show that, students who've had a same teacher are more likely to actually graduate from high school and enroll in college. So it's critical. I would also say in our sessions, we talk about the fact that, like with all this, yes, we would ideally want a racially diverse workforce, and that is what our goal is. Now, sideline too, we also need to have culturally sustaining teachers and culturally competent teachers in the classroom who may not share the background with their students. So it's definitely a double-fold work, right? We can't just ignore the leaders and the teachers, the white leaders and teachers that need support and how to best advocate for literally all of their students. Because we do have research that, as you probably have seen before, that talks about the fact that a white teacher is less likely to recommend a Black student for gifted and talented. We know about all the disparities within discipline, special education, right, that are happening. And it is not to say that any one teacher is necessarily trying to do these things, right? They're not maybe outwardly demonstrating sort of racist practices, but we all have biases, and we all have tendencies, and we all have things that we need to break through in order to best serve every student, right? We can go to the next one. Again, this is for you for later on. If you need some research, we've got the research right here in a slide, or some of the research, right, of things that I just talked about, that you can go back to and have in your back pocket. And we can go to the next one. And then we talk about the pool. Like I heard Lorraine say at the beginning, like we're just trying to get folks to, want to be in education. And we also know right now that this is a huge issue overall, right? With teacher recruitment in this day and age. But as you'll see when we get through to get into more a little bit of this, is that we try to talk about this topic from all lenses of the teacher sort of continuum. So from recruitment is one piece of it, but where does really recruitment start? It probably starts in K-12 education and what we're doing to make sure students, one, are educated, and two, are interested in the profession in K-12. So it is kind of this cycle of things that we talk about and look for ways to sort of disrupt barriers in all of those processes. But as you can see, it's not great of our pool. And we can go ahead to the next one. And I'll turn it back over to Shantice, because one thing that we do in our labs is we say we can't just jump in and try to fix as educators. And I'm guilty of this. I just want to fix the problem, right? But what we talk about in this work, and if you're familiar at all with liberatory design, is that you can't just jump into the work from where we are. We have to get the full picture and the full context of what's going on. And we make sure that we do this in each lab. So Shantice, I'm going to let you share some of the activities that we do around this.
Yes, and I love how we set things up as far as understanding when was the first time you had a teacher of color, a teacher of racially diverse background, mainly because it's tied to history. And it's tied to truly what's going on in our landscape of our pipeline today. And we have to understand history in order to really understand the barriers and also analyze what can be done. So in this activity, we start off with knowing the history and looking at Brown versus education, and really truly the unintended domino effect consequences of that wonderful decision for children, but that had ramifying implications on the education profession. right? So let's go ahead and start that video and we'll have a discussion afterwards. Uh-oh. I'm gonna put the video in the chat. Well, actually, Tara, if you go into the notes, you'll see a link to the video and you can play it from there. We can share it.
Sorry, we didn't hyperlink it there.
Yeah.
Tara, looks like you're having some screen issues. Do you think it'd be easier if I shared from mine?
Are you seeing it
Maybe.
now?
No. Oh, wait. No. Yes.
Say integration can be reversed, it can be stopped anywhere.
Tara, if you don't mind
Started and attacked
starting it
me
from the
at
beginning.
every single level.
White parents often assume
Thank you.
Brown versus Board of Education completely altered America's youth when it ended segregation. But the impact doesn't stop there. This is the story of those who truly bore the cost of integration and how one classroom defines our nation. It was 1951 in Topeka, the capital of Kansas. Oliver and Leola Brown were raising 3 daughters in a North Topeka neighborhood. Oliver's oldest daughter, Linda, was attending a black school called Monroe. To get there, Linda walked 7 blocks, crossed a busy road, then got on a bus. As 3rd grade approached, Oliver decided with the help of the local NAACP chapter that he would take his daughter to the white school, Sumner, that was 4 blocks away. They were turned away by the principal.
And I remember the day he took me over to Sumner and holding hands with him, and I remember his grip was much firmer than, going home. I could tell something was bothering me,
The NAACP chapter sued the school board. The case was eventually bundled with 4 other similar cases across the country and tried in front of the Supreme Court. In the final unanimous decision, Chief Justice Earl Warren famously writes, "Separate educational facilities are inherently unequal." And this is where the majority of history lessons across the US end. A victory.
They are the youth of America. They're all equal in the eyes of their country. In planning for public education, Americans have sought to give every youngster equal opportunity.
But not everybody was celebrating the decision. 65% of Black parents in Topeka with junior high students indicated that they preferred all Black schools. The Brown family had no problem with the Black school that Linda was attending besides distance. In fact, they loved Monroe.
The Black school was a very good school. We don't have any qualms about our schools. They were very good schools. We had quality teachers, but then it wasn't a matter of being a quality school. It was a matter of having to go so far to school. And there was a school in our neighborhood 4 blocks away.
The Browns were fighting based on principle. The denial of Linda's attendance should not be based on the color of her skin. While Black children across America were coping with abrupt changes, there was another population that was completely left out: teachers. The majority opinion focused solely on children. Black teachers were left with no employment guarantee despite their success at all Black schools, many of which closed after the ruling, as school systems across the country kept the white schools instead. Just east of Topeka, a small town in Missouri called Moberly closed their one Black school, Lincoln, after the Brown v. Board decision. The Moberly School Board fired all 11 of its Black teachers, whereas 121 white teachers were retained. 7 of those teachers decided to sue the school board. One teacher in particular, Mary Ella Timoney, formerly Mary Ella Hicks, had a PhD, fantastic ratings, involved in the community, and was obviously qualified. Yet she was fired instead of white teachers that only had provisional certificates. The court says, intangible factors such as personality, character, disposition, industry, and adaptability vitally affect the work of any teacher. We concede that the result is unusual and somewhat startling. In the usual situation, considering the number of applicants involved, one would suppose that a fair application of standards would result in the reemployment of some of the Negro teachers. The teachers lost the case in the appeal, and many left Moberly. Almost every case involving Black educators was dismissed on the basis of the Moberly ruling. This trend was an epidemic across the country after Brown v. Board, especially in the South. More than 40,000 Black educators lost their jobs during this time. Over $240 million were lost in teacher salaries in just 1 year as a result of the mass terminations. Prior to Brown, in the 17 states that had segregated school systems, 35 to 50% of the teaching force was Black. 1 year after Brown, this is what the Black population of cities looked like compared to the amount of Black teachers. Those Black teachers that remained on staff found that their job became even more difficult.
I say integration can be reversed, it can be stopped anywhere, provided an attack is made at every single level.
White parents often assumed Black teachers were less qualified than white teachers, though they held college degrees at nearly equal rates. In many districts, Black teachers who registered to vote were immediately fired. Some were forced to use student restrooms, and the backlash from parents in white communities drove many teachers out before they were fired.
Our teachers have been called names of all kinds, and they have made it a point within the last few weeks to do anything they could to make it difficult for the teachers.
Black students who wanted to make a difference and enjoyed learning suddenly began to see fewer and fewer teachers that look like them. In a 10-year period, the number of Black students who chose education as a major declined by 66%. Without advocates in the classroom, Black students were harassed by teachers, parents, and fellow students, and today they are often cited for behavioral issues at a disproportionate rate. If we compare the lives of 2 students, one Black and one white today, with similar math and reading scores in elementary school and similar home situations, that white student is still more than 2 times as likely to be selected for gifted programs in schools.
I think we can stop that video there.
Black students are selected 3
Although encourage folks to go back and look at it. And there's even a longer one by Malcolm Gladwell that we cite for you as a resource to look in more. Just curious from y'all, and I will say I'm from Wisconsin originally, and I will tell you that this is not what I was taught about Brown versus Board of Ed, right? I was taught that it was a great decision, that people wanted integration, and that, yeah, like it just wasn't what I was taught. The sort of Lily Pollyanna, what I was taught of that this was good for everybody. And yes, it was hard, but it was good. And definitely didn't get the detail of educators. And so when we think about, Shantice, even your experience of in college not having people, like the ripple effect of that firing alone and that thing it continues to today, right? Like you can just see how this happened of those teachers then didn't go into maybe professorships later, and then they weren't there to lead those courses. And they're like, it's mind-boggling. And I know we say unintended consequences there, and we put it in parentheses because we're like, yeah, when you read, if you've ever read that that decision point and sort of what happened after Brown, it's pretty eye-opening to see the intentionality that occurred at that time.
Right.
That was not for Black students or teachers or people.
And I think that's the beauty in history is because your decisions that you intentionally make, you don't know the ripple effects that will cause for the next generation and the next generation. And so I just would like you all to think about it and then share. This was done when? When was Brown? When was that video taking place? 19 what? 1954, 1950s, 1960s, right?
1955 is when
Yeah.
The
decision was made, but that happened all the way through the 60s.
Yes. So
And
what do
70s
you
in some
think?
places.
Yes. What do you think happened? And you think you see all those lawsuits that happen with those educators against different districts and being shut down. What do you think happened with those families of those teachers? And what was communicated to their children about the profession?
Yeah.
Right. And we're trying to recruit. What happened to what do you see with conversations that might have had what was happening with the students and how they felt? But we're trying to recruit. And those kids are what age now?
Those kids are my age.
Yes. And they had kids, right? And
Yeah.
I'm a product of
And
that.
grandkids
And they have
that are
grandkids.
still struggling. Yes.
Still struggling. But the key is struggling with the notion that this is an open profession for us.
Mm-hmm.
And you're wanting to recruit us. So that goes into understanding history and how that plays a part. And before we go to the next slide, yes, we have unintended consequences and with high-tech state testing or accountability, but it also goes into the unintended consequences that happen to the families. And before going into education, I told my parents I wanted to do this, and they were like, "Oh, wait." And that's when I learned that I had my great grandmother was one of these educators. Now, why is this a family secret? Why is this a situation where I didn't know? Imagine going from a teacher. What profession do you think she had a choice in doing back then in the South? Maid or what? Yes. So it's like, why, go with generational wealth. You want to do this, you want to do something else. Are you sure you want to do this? So, and I think it's very important to understand that because in different districts or different people who are doing hiring practices or trying to create diversity changes within their state may not look like me. And they need to understand that you have to understand this in order to try to connect with people that might look like me or diverse individuals in order to pull them back in to say, this is a wonderful profession for you. So if you don't mind advancing to the next slide. So this question I want you to just think about because most of you all are not in an actual school district, but do you think the district reform or programs that can you think of a district reform or programs that may have had a similar unintended or intended consequence within your state?
Well, on your previous slide, you talked about teacher evaluation reform things, and that has had huge unintended consequences and lots of negative consequences because it's being used punitively instead of to support teachers. And use it, and at one time even using kids evaluations to say you're not doing a good enough job as a teacher if kids aren't progressing in your class, and blaming it all on a single teacher rather than taking a look at the overall system of what we're doing with our students. So that's been a big issue here in Michigan anyway.
And
Shanti
Carrie,
said-
you
Oh, go ahead.
okay. Carrie, you mentioned something that your diversity, equity, inclusion division was closed, right? And it's not the consequence of really, to me, closing that, but it's the tone that the tone that presents to those that are diverse individuals to say, well, why is it closed? What does that mean for me? What does that mean, period? Right? Sometimes we don't hear how other people's conversations and decisions affect the perceptions of those that are racially diverse, right? So that's just a point to bring up there as well. Tammy, you wanted to say something before we
I was
go
gonna
to the
say,
next?
I was gonna keep us going because it's
Yep.
10:50 and I know we've
Yes,
got
yes.
time
All
in
right.
here. Yeah.
So looking at this goes right into understanding and having conversations about the barriers. From the understanding history, then we look at the unintended or intended consequences for attracting those to the profession, preparation, recruiting practices, hiring practices, developing practices, and retaining practices. What we want you to do is, if you could go ahead and advance. And we're going to show you all one more, please. We're going to actually have you all brainstorm on this. We're going to quickly do pull up the Google Drive. We're going to put a link in the chat. Tammy, you have the link there?
Yeah.
And what I would like you all to do is just write one. Think of in each box, if you can, a barrier in attracting, preparing, recruiting, hiring, developing, or retaining teachers of racially diverse with racially diverse backgrounds. And if you don't mind, Tara, to display that Google chart. And I'm going to give you maybe 2 minutes just to go ahead and write in an idea that you feel that could be a barrier in those different areas.
And again, as you do this, we're just trying to give you a taste of some of the things that we actually do in the labs and would encourage people to do to get people thinking about this, right? Because it's not simple. There are lots of reasons why there are lots of barriers. And there are lots of real barriers that we'll probably come up with. But that sometimes those barriers are not barriers that everybody else has experienced because it's not been their experience, right? So part of this is to actually just put them all out on the table, but then also for folks in teams to recognize like, oh, I didn't think about that. Because it was not my experience. And we recognize that our own lived experiences, sort of, I won't say dictate, but they influence, what we're thinking about. And so we want to make sure other folks that are in recruiting or in these positions to do this work are thinking about some of those barriers that they may not recognize.
As you all write in, I'm going to just make a couple of comments of some common recruitment and retention barriers that could be out there. For example, student debt. That might be a huge thing for several.
And Shantice, there's studies about that. There's studies that show that more. Oh, thank you, Carrie. Sorry that it went ahead there. Go ahead and throw in the chat.
Thank you.
That talk about debt.
The lack of support with administration, lack of induction and mentors support that's mentoring specific to their needs. The lack of exposure in high school to how this profession is really welcoming to them. Think about how often our kids hear fellow educators talk about, don't go into education. I'm tired. I don't want to. We are our own worst enemies sometimes. We don't market our own field, right? And, the lack of diversity at the faculty that they might have. That's very important as well. Work conditions. Work conditions being an issue can also be a barrier. Now, as
Well,
you
I
all,
think Carrie mentioned earlier too, that not only did teachers not feel welcome in their school, but students don't feel welcome. And if we look at sort of the push out rate of Black and Latino students and Indigenous students and wonder, why would somebody come back and work in a place where they didn't feel supported in the first place?
place.
Right? So we've got to do some deep digging into these that are not just, it's not always about pay, although pay is part of it, right? But we got to think about when you're talking about preparing, student teaching can be a huge barrier depending on a state's regulations on what people have to do, the costs associated with having to student teach, being able to get from, if you go to school in, Detroit, and I'm here at school, like Lorraine, like you were at Wayne, but then I have to go out somewhere else to the county to do my student teaching. How am I going to get there if public transportation doesn't get there? Like, there's all these just very sometimes logistical barriers, but then also when I get there, am I the only again? And what that looks like and how that piece is. Just the idea of praxis. And
Yes.
is praxis a culturally competent, culturally, is it a test that's actually testing what we need people to know, or is it designed honestly for white people to achieve? All of
Also,
these things play into it, right?
also, I see the cost of living, the cost of housing.
Yeah. So we just go into into deep conversation around these and really try to get as many as we can on the table with teams to have that conversation.
If you can share slide 24.
And then we look at opportunities to how do we disrupt them? And what's been amazing about this work is when I first started doing this work, I thought that everybody was going to blame everybody else. I thought when we were meeting and we had a group of all these groups, I thought the prep programs were going to blame the districts. I thought, I really thought it was going to be turned into a blame game. And thankfully, and I think because of all the conversations we have leading up to this, it's never been. It's always been oh my goodness, we can control that. And it's a look for what is in the locus of control, because some of these things are all three, right? They kind of sit in all three places. But then you look at and say, well, but this is what we can do if I'm a district or if I'm a state or if I'm a prep program. This is what we can do. And I've really been just inspired by different teams who've come up with saying this is where we could actually disrupt this barrier and what we can do. So it's been actually a lot of fun doing that work, because it is very inspiring when people are wanting to make that change. So that kind of leads us into, so we do all that work, but at a much longer, time frame, and having more conversations to get to the point of saying like, okay, now districts or states, let's use your own data to talk about what's going on. So we look at the data and we do an actual root cause analysis of their data. And we don't stop at there just aren't as many applicants. Like, let's go to why there aren't applicants. Or we dig into maybe sometimes the hard conversation of what's going on in your district in terms of why Black, Latino, and Indigenous people do not want to apply at your school. Word of mouth is huge in education. So we help districts and talk about the real things that are going on, which many times goes back to systemic racism that exists within their structures, their systems. It digs into the fact that this can't just be a HR approach to how we're hiring. We can't just go to more HBCUs and think we're going to get more applicants, right? Because if your principals are biased and aren't hiring, then that's not going to do you any good as an HR team, right? So we go into those conversations. We also go through a conversation of like, what data out there would help you understand a racial gap. So just really fun. And for fun, this is actually my kids in this waterfall. It was the one weekend approval, but I like this picture. So I shared that my daredevil children in the waterfall. But we'd love for, we were going to do it as a waterfall if we had lots of people and peed out, but just in your head quickly, what's a piece of data that you would want to better understand racial gaps in your workforce?
Graduation rates,
Graduation rates.
is definitely a piece that I would want to know. The data that you gave us earlier, down to specifics. If I was a building principal, I'd want to know specifically in my building,
Yeah.
what's the data? How many students do I have of the different diverse
Races.
backgrounds and so on, and how many teachers do I have that have any diverse background?
Yeah.
And pairing that with the student demographics, you know, like looking
Yeah.
by school, what does that look like by school, you know, at the student level and at the teaching level, and how do they compare?
And then looking at the community demographics as well. You know, in Michigan, we have schools of choice. So is my school racially diverse because we have schools of choice and kids are coming in from other communities? Or is it the community, because that tends to affect the teacher workforce in my building?
We just saw in another state, we were looking at some data and we were looking at the community data compared to the teacher data. And the community data was, and we should know this, right? It's, you know, there's no minority anymore when we're talking about racially diverse backgrounds. The Latino
Right.
and African-American population are actually the majority. So, you know, when we think about that in a community, but they're not teachers. So you can't
Right.
tell me the people aren't there, right? Thanks, Beth. This will be recorded. We'll send it out. It's not that the people aren't there. They're not in education. So we've got to stop, you know, using that sort of excuse. I know people who want, you know, their application data. They want their hiring data if they can. Their interview, who's getting interviews, who's going from interview there, to see where that maybe that bias and that gap happens, right? People talk about if they have a grow your own program, who's in those grow your own programs. I always like to say, because we've seen in lots of communities where there are Black and Latin paraprofessionals or TAs that, you know, they're like, yes, let's recruit from there. And I go back and say, well, what didn't we do to help prepare these same people in high school to start this from the beginning? There's no data to back that up. So please, that's a Tammy-ism, not a researched practice, but it does make me wonder, right? If you have I know in like Ohio, they have what is it called, Tara and Shantice, the student group. A pathway. Yeah.
Yeah. And that, because you asked me, now
That's
I
when
can't
you
remember.
can't say it, but there's a pathway for teaching in high school, like a CTE
Yes.
program,
Yes.
right?
Ed Rising.
Ed Rising.
Rising.
Thank you.
Yes,
Tara.
thank you.
Thank you, Carrie. You know, like who's in that group? Who are the teachers of that group, right? Keep going. But we point these all out, and all these data points are really, really helpful. And here's a tool that we'll send you out to, that you can actually take any data that you have at a district level, at a state level. And it's kind of a fun, just Excel spreadsheet that you pop in some data and it'll spit out some graphs for you to show where the gaps start happening. A funnel graph that just kind of shows you again how that goes down. And then those parity gaps that we were just talking about, if that you want to do some comparison. And so we'll send you this link to that just to have as a tool. And we have each district or state complete this graphic with whatever data they have. And sometimes they don't have much. They have student level, and then they have teachers, and they don't really have anything in between or after. And we're like, you know what? That's okay too. That's just a point that says your first step is to start getting some data sources. But I bet even from those data sources, you have information. You have anecdotal data, some qualitative data that can tell you what's going on. We know districts that say one principal never, you know, hires a Black teacher. They send them all over to this other school, or the HR department does it because they're like, oh, well, you should be over there. So we're making all these assumptions based on our own biases, right? That we need to address. We can go to the next slide, Tara, because I know we're over time. And so Shantice, you can talk a little bit about some of the
Can do.
tool, the last, I'll say this, Shantice, we do that individual group session with each district or small team so that we can really dig into their data and then have those honest conversations about why these things are happening. And we try to start looking for themes that's going on so that we can figure out, okay, from here, what might be your short-term quick win step, and what is your longer term goal that you need to work on in your district? Because none of these things, there's few things that can change overnight. Like you can quickly change a hiring process. That doesn't require board policy change, all those things. But some of these things, when you're thinking about belief systems of people and cultural competency, that's going to take more time. So we look for those short-term wins and those long-term wins. But in our last session, before we do some action planning, we share resources.
Yes, and that goes into meeting 3. And one thing I love about these resources is really getting us to looking at our profession and marketing it. How are we being visible or viewed outside? Looking at our Facebook accounts, our LinkedIn groups, our social media. Is it warm? Is it inviting? Is it diverse? Does it say, hey, I want you and you belong here? Right? That's the first step. In order to you're fighting against perceptions. And perception might not tie to reality or the realities of what the district is trying or the state is trying to move towards. But if your recruitment or your visibility does not match that, you're not going to reach people that you're trying to reach. Right?
And we say that without doing it superficially, right? Like if you don't have people, don't put that one Black teacher on every part of your marketing materials, right? Like don't do things that and honestly, we have those conversations. And also say, like, if you're being real about it as a district and you've come up with a plan, to say, like, listen, we know this is an issue of ours. We would love to have people support us in growing. Like, be real.
And that's it. Being real with who you have and saying what you want to go to. Right? And for creating those resources in order to make it happen. Holding information sessions, building relationships with candidates of color in the community, outside the community, in order to make sure that you can retain those. Connecting with HBCUs, of course, but also other universities to talk about. One thing Lauren said, she was concerned it was going to go back into the 1970s where they had the RIFs and didn't have the teachers. Well, the issue is districts understanding specifically the fields of study that they need. If it's science teachers, great. That you need to make sure that you're creating a diverse workforce with science teachers. One part in my former life, I was a manager at Georgia Department of Education, and STEM was a huge push. STEM. But how in the world we do not talk about our profession as one of the STEM professions, I do not know. So it's like you're talking about all these other professions and we're growing all these other professions, but our own profession. So that goes back to, if you want to see our profession grow, you have to go to the universities and say, don't close your fields. Let me tell you where they will have jobs. Let me tell you the fields that we need them in. And that includes HBCUs and other schools that have populations that you say, hey, we want a diverse field in this. Right? Good, thank you.
And then it gets into going to universities and finding their associations, and it not necessarily even education, right? Like your Black engineers, your indigenous community,
computer science,
right? Whatever it is,
biology. Those that are not just fields of study that we believe. A lot of people like to say, hey, I'm not going to continue this. That was my thing. I wanted to be a child psychologist, but I was like, Lord have mercy, I'm going to have to go get my. At that time I was like, I don't want to keep going to school. And so I ended up going into special education, right? And I was like, I need to make a little money. So but that was the avenue for me. Right? That might be an avenue for other people. What incentives do we have out there? All teachers want to understand the incentives, because no longer is it this a field of saying you're just giving. Well, we want you and we want to pour inside of you, right? Bonus referrals, one-time stipends, gift cards, different things like that, and entice them to our field. Because other professions are doing it. We have to learn how to market our profession. Conduct audits of websites and hiring materials and processes, job descriptions. truly the words that are used that could be dismissive, or even looking at if a potential candidate goes to that school website and say, what does this website look like? Do I belong there? Right? Keep going, please. Thank you. And here are some resources. We don't just talk about it. We want to give them specific resources in order for them to look at and use. We're the best borrowers in education, right? So here are some sample resources that they can use as a example to all these things that we are showing them and telling them within the labs. The key thing that in this section, we talk about the hiring practices. Even though you're changing the culture, you're changing different things, it doesn't matter if they don't get in the door. And so we're looking at the applicants. If you have a lot of applicants, but they don't seem to be getting the job or even the interview or pulled for the interview, that is a structural issue. That structure, understanding who's on the recruitment team and looking at them to make sure that they're racially diverse individuals and look like the community that you serve, right, as much as possible. Or they can speak the language in order to recruit and have an open conversations with those that may not look like them, but say you belong with us. Let me connect with you. Training your staff in order to do this, right? How to avoid biases in interviews, using competency-based hiring tools. Can go forward. And we provide them again a list of tools and resources that they can use. Retention strategy, another way, conducting stay interviews. We always say, oh, we need to do this, we need to do this. Not so many districts or schools actually do this. Why are you staying? Right? What can I do to make you stay? Well, how can I change the culture and climate of that school or that district in order to entice you for you to know that you belong here? And one way to do that is truly implementing a targeted induction and mentoring program. One program does not fit all. If you do not look and say, hey, how do we make sure it is for all? And we provide you some resources there, sample interview examples, mentor induction toolkit that we have on the GTL website. We provide them a lot of resources so that they don't feel like they have to create something from scratch.
Shantice, also plug that ICF will have on their website. We took that mentoring toolkit, mentoring for diversity toolkit, and made them into some modules, some online modules that again can be done sort of individually, or you could use them if you are teaching mentors or just as a district, but they'll be up soon as well. And they really help people, and some of the content is the same in those around sort of like history, but it really takes people into start with self. We've got to start with ourself and our own reflection and understanding our own background and biases, and takes people through that journey, or at least part of it.
And throughout the process, we have them reflect. So this is some examples of some reflection questions that they are faced in order to allow them to really think deeply and really help them come up with their action plan. Right? Yeah. And we can go forward. So do you all have any questions for us before we end this session?
We took you through as much as we could, a 3-day session in, an hour. So obviously, we appreciate you being willing to sort of look at a few of the activities that are in here. But this idea being that you have to lay the foundation first, and then you have to have folks go through the real data in an honest way, right? That root cause analysis piece before you can plan. And we always have people during the first meeting saying like, well, we should do this. And we're like, nope, slow down, time out, because you're not sure what you're doing is actually going to work for your problem. You got to figure out where your gaps are happening, if you can, and dig at it deeper. And like I said, instead of putting that Band-Aid on, right? Because that won't actually do the work. So like we said, we've done these work, and we'll send these out. Tara will send these out to everybody, the slides. So the slides, you should be able to hyperlink to the resources. We also have just a document of the resources that we put in these labs for you to be able to use, in addition to another toolkit that we developed for the mentoring guide, just for folks to have, because we're all about just sort of sharing as much information as we possibly can with folks, to encourage and help anybody who's having these conversations in their district, states, work environments. And
Who
of
was
course,
typically
if
at the
there's
table?
yep, sorry, Carrie.
Who was typically at the table for these conversations, and like how large of a group, or what was kind of the range that you saw?
Yeah, so like I said, we've done this with states before, where we've had 30, 40 people from across the state. So you've had EPP folks, you've had principals, you've had state folks, you've had HR district folks, you've had superintendents. I think that's where we encourage to start. At district levels, we encourage as big of a team as you want to bring. But what we ask for is somebody from HR, somebody high up in HR. Let me say that too. Somebody who's a decision maker in HR, somebody who's a decision maker for the district, if possible. So whether that's a soup, an assistant soup, a director of some sort, then we ask for principals. And then we say, if there's a union rep that you think needs to be involved, bring them in. If you have a partnership, because some people do have really great partnerships with universities, bring those people in. We've also seen entire EPP teams who are interested come to the sessions, and they've come as a team to help themselves get through the barriers that are involved in any sort of institution, right? And then we always see if folks have a DEI person, they're usually charging the session, but we say, like, clearly they're important to the meeting, but also they can't do the work by themselves. You have to have everybody else around. So we've seen ranges of like 3 to 4 people, and up to 12 to 15 come as a team.
I think it's important that what Tammy said, you want your decision makers there.
Yeah.
Because this is the third, remember that third session is the action plan. And if you're trying to influence change, then change has to happen. And you have to have those that can make that change happen there.
And I will say with that action plan too, like, we have a template we try to work people through, but we're also not the people who are looking to create more plans for plan's sakes. So we're like, if you have a plan that already does this, that has pieces of this in there, let's go back and look at that plan and revise it to being, actionable in these areas. If you don't, and you're, somebody that, like, I've worked with districts before where they really don't even have a strategic plan. We're like, well, then let's build this plan out. And here's a template for you to do it. And we've also supported people who didn't bring their decision makers. That's who we encourage to come, but we've worked with them to say, okay, so from your seat, what can you do? How can you influence?
Right.
Your next step.
And that looks very different. Other questions, comments, and you can definitely reach out to Tara or us afterwards if you have more questions or interested in the labs more of how we've thought about making these into modules too, but these ones really there's so much of it is built around the conversation, that we just need people to be able to facilitate the conversations, and are comfortable, facilitating conversations that can get a little sticky sometimes. We went over by 10 minutes after our 10-minute late start point, but really appreciate both of you for coming and staying with us and participating. Hopefully you got some new tools to bring back to folks, and just some thought process of maybe how something like this could be useful in your context or with other people that you work with. Like, Carrie, I think about you in the National Center of, like, you have access to lots of states that may, or districts that may be a part of it. So please reach out if you see this as something that can be useful, both in Wyoming or in other places that you work with. And Lorraine in Michigan, like, we were thinking about doing some of these labs with ICF and Region 8 in Indiana. And, there's more opportunity when the centers get up and back and running after the recompetition to continue to do this type of.
When is that supposed to happen by?
Well, so I think like everybody's waiting on pins and needles of like those decisions. I think by the end of September, Tara, right? Like the contract ends September 30th for folks. So theoretically, the decision should be coming any day. And then it takes at least a month or so. If somebody's still holding that comp center from the organization, you could kind of just keep running. But for folks that are transitioning, it may take a month or so. But yeah, so I would say within the next couple of weeks, you'd be able to reach out and to the people
Okay.
and say, hey,
Yeah, because I'm thinking some of this might work in partnership with our launch program as like the next step to help some of our districts, especially the career centers, recruiting the students because they need, I mean, they need some help because we're not getting the diverse students that we hoped to get. We're getting a lot more. It's happening more and more, but not enough.
So we got to figure out why, right?
Yeah,
and
exactly.
take a look at that. And
And
again,
it may
similar
be
process,
down to
right?
district level where we have to, start working more closely with specific districts to see what we can do.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Fantastic.
So I will talk to our launch team that's continuing to work. We have a transition model that we're working on. But yeah, we had the support of Region 8 for 5 years and we're gonna really miss them. So
well, hopefully it won't go away. And hopefully, you can build it back into the plan.
Yeah, we'll see.
Yeah,
I know. It's a little more complicated now because of the split between the Department of Education and
Michigan has that too.
But I think we can manage the partnerships together since my office is the partnerships office. So we'll see what we can do.
We'll see what you can do.
Thank you. Right. This was very enlightening, and I really think that this is going to be useful for us. And so you'll send us a copy of the PowerPoint with all the links and all that. Okay.
Yes, and a couple of the additional resources that Tammy mentioned, the mentoring guide, and we'll let you know when the modules are online. And yeah, we will look forward to seeing how this goes out in Michigan and Wyoming and all the other states. So great work, everyone. So I appreciate everybody's time and participation, and we'll look forward to the next meeting.
Thank you so much for putting this all together.
Our pleasure.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Have a great day. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.